My name is Serena. I'm 34 years old. I manage supply chain operations for a mid-size pharmaceutical distributor, which means I spend my days tracking numbers that don't lie, contracts that do, and people who confuse the two. I have always been comfortable with complexity. What I was never comfortable with was being the kind of woman who lets people walk through her like she's a glass door. I became that woman anyway. For almost a decade, I was exactly that. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start with the Thursday morning when my phone rang and I saw a name I hadn't seen in 2 years. Not a text, a call. My Aunt Paulette. The woman who raised me after my mother passed when I was 11. The woman who taught me to balance a checkbook before I learned to drive. The woman who, 2 years ago, stopped speaking to me because I refused to co-sign a business loan for my cousin Derek, who had never once held a job for longer than 8 months. I stared at her name on the screen through 3 full rings. I answered. "Serena, baby," she said. And her voice was warm in the way that only people who know exactly how to use warmth as a tool can be. "We miss you. The whole family. We've been talking and we think it's time to come together. To heal." She said, heal like it was a word she'd practiced. She said it was just going to be a small gathering. Her house. Sunday dinner. Her and Derek. Maybe a couple of others. Just family. Nothing big. She used the word intimate 3 times in the span of 2 minutes, which told me exactly how many people were going to be there. But I said yes anyway. And that was my first mistake. Or rather, it was the mistake I'd been making for 10 years, wearing a different coat. Welcome back to Calm Betrayal TV, where ordinary people face impossible family moments and walk out with their dignity intact. If you've ever been the one expected to pay, to fix, to stay quiet, this story is for you. Drop a comment. Hit subscribe. But first, let me back up. Before the dinner, let me tell you who I was, before I tell you what happened at that dinner, because who I was is the whole reason they thought it would work. I grew up in my Aunt Paulette's house starting at age 11. My mother, her younger sister, died from a sudden cardiac event in October of my 5th grade year. There was no father in the picture. There was no savings account, no life insurance, no plan. There was only Paulette, who lived 40 minutes away in a bigger house with a spare room and a big personality, and the kind of generosity that comes with conditions attached so fine print small, you don't see them until you're already underwater. Paulette had one biological child, Derek, 3 years older than me, somehow both charming and chronically unaccountable. The kind of person who borrowed your umbrella on a sunny day and left you soaked in November. I learned early that in Paulette's house, love was a ledger. What you received was logged. What you gave was expected. And if you questioned the math, you were selfish. I was a scholarship student who worked 20 hours a week through undergrad and graduated with honors in logistics and operations. I took a job at a small import firm at 22. By 27, I'd moved to the pharmaceutical company. By 30, I was managing a team of 14 and a budget in the 8-figure range. Paulette came to none of my graduations. She did call every single time I hit a milestone to tell me about Derek's latest venture and whether I might be able to help get it off the ground. Over 10 years, I lent Derek $11,000. I paid Paulette's water bill twice when she said the account was flagged. I sent a grocery delivery every December because Paulette mentioned once that the holidays felt thin. I helped her refinance a car loan when the rate was absurd, and I had the credit score she didn't. I didn't do these things because I was guilted into them every time. Some of them I offered freely because I loved her and I knew what she'd done for me and I genuinely wanted to help. But somewhere along the way, the offerings became expectations. The choice became an obligation. And when I finally said no, when Derek needed $50,000 for a food truck fleet with no business plan, no commercial kitchen experience, and a credit score that would make a mortgage broker faint, the family didn't see a woman drawing a reasonable line. They saw a traitor. Paulette told me, calmly and with great dignity, that the girl she'd raised would have shown more loyalty. That blood took care of blood. That money wasn't the point. It was always the point. She stopped calling. Derek stopped answering my texts. Cousins fell quiet. 2 years of silence followed. Absolute and organized, the kind of silence that only happens when someone orchestrates it. And then, a phone call, a Sunday dinner, intimate, family, heal. The decision my coworker Brianna told me not to go. She said it so flatly, so immediately, that it almost made me laugh. She didn't even pause. She said, "Serena, I have known you for 4 years and I have never once heard you talk about this family without your jaw getting tight. That's a no." My therapist, Dr. Elaine Torres, didn't tell me not to go. She did something more effective. She asked me what I was hoping to find there. I sat with that question for longer than I expected. I said, "I want to know if she actually misses me." Dr. Torres nodded. "And if she does? Then I'll know it was real. Some part of it. And if she doesn't? Then I'll know that too." Dr. Torres wrote something in her notebook. She said, "Go if you need to know. But go as yourself. Not as the person they remember." I wrote that on a note card and tucked it in my jacket pocket. Go as yourself. Not as the person they remember. The arrival I dressed carefully on Sunday. Not formally. Dark jeans, a cream-colored blazer I'd bought the previous winter, and small gold hoops that had belonged to my mother. I drove 35 minutes with the radio on low and my hand steady on the wheel. I noticed the extra cars before I even turned into the driveway. Paulette Street was quiet on Sunday afternoons. Usually 2, maybe 3 cars lined the curb near her house. I counted 7. I recognized 5 of them. My cousin Marcus's truck, his wife Trina's sedan, Uncle Bertram's van with the cracked taillight he'd been meaning to fix since 2019, a car I didn't recognize, and a shiny new Escalade parked directly in front of the house that I knew with cold certainty belonged to Derek, because Derek had spent the last 10 years buying things he couldn't keep. Intimate, Paulette had said. I counted 7 vehicles. I sat in my car with the engine running and looked at those 7 vehicles, and I thought about the note card in my jacket pocket. I got out. The house smelled the way it always had. Brown butter and onion, and the particular floral scent of the plug-in air freshener Paulette kept by the front door. The one shaped like a gardenia, familiar in the way that only childhood homes are familiar, even the ones that weren't always safe. The dining room table had been extended with both leaves. Every chair was filled. 14 people, not 4. The table Paulette stood when she saw me. She crossed the room with her arms open and her eyes bright, and she hugged me the way she used to when I was 11 and scared, and she was the only solid thing. I let her hold me because the muscle memory of it was older than my resentment. "Look who's home," she said. The room responded. Warm, coordinated, rehearsed in the way of people who'd been talking about this moment before I arrived. I sat down. What else do you do when 14 people are watching and the chair is already pulled out and someone is already setting a plate in front of you? I sat down, and I smiled. And I did what I've learned to do in every high-stakes room I've ever been in. I went quiet and I paid attention. The food was abundant. Paulette had cooked the way she only cooked for occasions she considered important. Baked chicken, macaroni, collard greens, cornbread in a cast-iron skillet, sweet potato pie on the counter. Real food, serious food. The kind of meal that takes a full day to prepare. She'd worked hard for this. That thought softened something in me, and hardened something else at the same time. The conversation moved through the usual channels. How's work? The traffic getting here? Marcus's youngest starting kindergarten. The neighbors who'd moved away. Derek's latest project, described in the vague, enthusiastic terms of someone who hasn't tested the concept against reality yet. I asked questions. I listened. I kept my plate manageable, and my glass full of water. I was doing what Dr. Torres had said. Being myself. Not the woman they remembered. The one who would feel the room's want and move toward it automatically, like a compass finding north. The pressure builds. The testing started around the 2nd hour. It always starts around the 2nd hour, once the food has settled and the room feels comfortable enough to stop performing and start angling. Paulette's friend, Miss Yvonne, who I'd met twice in my life, told me it must be nice having a big corporate job while other folks were just trying to make ends meet. She laughed when she said it. She had that laugh. The kind that's supposed to give you permission to be offended so that you look thin-skinned when you are. Derek didn't say much. He was saving himself. I could feel it the way you can feel a weather system moving in before it arrives. Paulette said, almost to herself, almost to the room. We always knew Serena would do well. We raised her right. There it was. The first claim of ownership. We raised her. As though my success was a crop they'd planted and were now owed a harvest from. I nodded and took a sip of water. The ask came from an angle I didn't fully anticipate, which I'll give them credit for. It wasn't direct. It was structural. After the plates were cleared and the sweet potato pie was distributed and the room was warm with sugar and conversation, Paulette's voice shifted register, just slightly. The way a singer drops into a key they've been warming up for. She started talking about the house. The furnace had been unreliable all winter. The roof had a section in the back that worried her every time it rained. The property tax had gone up again and the savings she'd set aside were thinner than she'd like going into summer. She said all of this looking at the table, not at me. Which was the tell. When Paulette looked at the table, she was building towards something. When she looked at you directly, she'd already arrived. She arrived. Serena, she said, lifting her eyes to mine. I know things got complicated between us. I know Derek's situation put you in a hard place. But you know this house has always been your house too. I said nothing. I waited. And I just wonder, now that things have settled, if there's any way you might help us think about what it would take to get some of these repairs done. Nothing extravagant. She gestured with her hand in the small, dismissive way people gesture when they're talking about large amounts of money. Just making sure the house is sound. Derek set his phone down. First time all evening. The table had been arranged. The witnesses were present. The request was made inside the language of homecoming and shared history, and that is your house too. A sentence designed to make me feel like a beneficiary, so that I behave like one. The answer, I understood what was happening. And I understood. Sitting there was my mother's gold hoops in my ears, and the note card in my jacket pocket, and 2 years of clarity. Dr. Torres had helped me build. That I had a choice. The version of me they remembered would have said, of course, let me see what I can do, and gone home and opened her laptop and started researching contractors and written the check she'd never fully recover from emotionally. I was not that version. I set my fork down beside my plate. I folded my hands. And I asked the question I should have asked on the phone 10 days ago. Aunt Paulette, I want to understand what you're asking. Are you asking me for money for home repairs? Or are you asking me to come home? Because those are different things. And I want to make sure I understand which one this dinner is about. She blinked. Serena. I'm asking you to be family. I said, I've been family. For 10 years, I was family in every way you needed me to be. I sent money. I signed for things. I showed up every time something fell apart. And when I said no to one thing that would have put $50,000 of my liability on a plan that had no foundation, I stopped being family overnight. She started to speak. I kept going. I wasn't loud. I'm rarely loud. I've learned that a quiet room carries farther than a raised voice. I came today because I love you. I came because you raised me when no one else would, and that's real. And it will always be real. But I'm not going to sit at this table and let homecoming be a transaction. If you want a relationship with me, I want that too. Genuinely. But what you're describing, the furnace, the roof, the property tax, that's not a conversation. That's a pitch. And I think you know the difference. The crack in the wall, Paulette's chin rose. I know that gesture. I'd grown up watching it. It meant she was deciding whether to be hurt or angry, and the decision would depend on which one played better to the room. She chose hurt. She said, I can't believe after everything. After I took you in, gave you a home, gave you a family, I know what you gave me, I said. I've been paying for it for 10 years. The table went still. And I don't say that to be cruel. I say it because I think we never named it. I think we both pretended it was love, no strings, when actually there were always strings. And I kept pulling on them because I was 11 years old when you became my only safe place, and that kind of gratitude doesn't have an off switch. You knew that. Paulette's eyes filled. The real kind, I thought. Or close enough. Derek leaned forward. So what, you came all the way here just to go off on her? I looked at him. I hadn't planned what I was going to say to Derek, but it came clearly. The way things come clearly. When you've had 2 years to think about them. Derek, I want you to do well. I genuinely do. But I've lent you $11,000 that I've never mentioned to anyone at this table. Not once, and not $1 of it has come back to me. Not a note, not a plan, not a conversation. I said no to the food truck because $50,000 is not a no-strings gift I could afford emotionally or financially. And I would say no again. That's not family failure. That's a boundary. He sat back. Uncle Bertram, to his enormous credit, said quietly, "She's not wrong, Paulette." That was the crack in the wall. Small, but real. What happened next? Paulette cried. Not the performative kind. Or maybe it started that way. But somewhere in the middle of it, it became something else, something older. She pressed her hands over her eyes and she said, "I miss her. I miss your mother every day. And you look more and more like her, and I don't know what to do with that." I sat with that for a long moment. I said, "I know." Because I did know. And that was the truest, most uncomplicated thing either of us had said all evening. There's this version of family stories where everything resolves in the final 10 minutes, where the tears come and the honesty follows and everyone leaves changed. I want to be careful not to sell you that version, because it isn't what happened. What happened is that dinner ended the way complicated things end. Not cleanly. Paulette stopped asking about the house. I don't know if it was because she heard me or because the room had shifted and the ask no longer had the momentum it needed. Either way, it didn't come back up. I helped carry plates to the kitchen. Trina washed and I dried, and she said, barely above a whisper, "You handled that with more grace than I would have." I told her she gave herself too little credit. Marcus walked me to my car. He said he thought I was right. He also said it quietly, the way people say things they can't afford to say at full volume in rooms where the accounting is still being done. The aftermath. The aftermath. The aftermath arrived in pieces over the following weeks. Paulette texted me 9 days later, not to apologize directly, but to say she'd been thinking. That she realized some things had been unfair. That she hoped we could keep talking. I wrote back, I'd like that. No more, no less. Derek didn't reach out. I didn't expect him to. Miss Yvonne apparently had opinions about me that she distributed freely through the extended family network. I know because Marcus told me, shaking his head, that she'd said I was cold. That I had money and no heart. I thought about that. Cold. I've been called cold before. Usually by people who needed me to be warm enough to say yes to something that would cost me. Cold, in my experience, is often the word people use when a woman declines to be useful in the way they planned. I'm not cold. I'm specific. 3 months after the dinner, Paulette called again. She didn't ask for anything. She asked if I wanted to come for her birthday in August. Small, she said. Just the immediate family. I laughed before I could stop myself. She heard it. She said, I deserve that. And that, more than anything else said in the months between, made me think that something in her had actually moved. Not all the way. Maybe not enough. But some. I said, send me the date. What I learned I found out, later, through Trina, that Derek's resale business lasted 4 months. That Paulette's furnace was repaired by a church program that helped seniors with home maintenance. That the roof section had been patched by a neighbor's son on a Saturday for the cost of lunch. None of it needed me. That's the part they never say out loud in these families. That the thing you were being told only you could fix often gets fixed without you. That your absence doesn't cause the collapse they promised it would. It just causes them to find other options. Options they had the whole time. I thought a lot about what I would tell the 22-year-old version of myself. The one who moved into her first apartment with a box of dishes and a credit card with a $4,000 limit and a deep, wordless need to be loved in a way that felt like being kept. I would tell her, the people who love you for what you provide will never run out of ways to need you. And the people who love you for who you are will never make you prove it with a check. I would tell her, helping from abundance feels different than helping from fear. Learn the difference. It will take you a while. That's okay, I would tell her. When someone says, family takes care of family, ask them who they mean by family. And ask them what they mean by takes care of. Because in my experience, those two phrases do a lot of heavy lifting for a very specific arrangement. One where the taking happens on one side and the caring is expected from the other. Closing. The note card I'd written Dr. Torres's words on, the one in my jacket pocket that Sunday, is still on my desk at work. It's a little creased now. The ink is faint at the fold. Go as yourself. Not as the person they remember. I went as myself. And for the first time in 10 years, I sat at a table full of people who'd known me since childhood. And I was the only one there who knew exactly what I would and wouldn't do. That's what self-respect actually feels like. Not distance. Not hardness. Not the cold that Miss Yvonne diagnosed from across a dinner table. It feels like being in the same room with your history. And not being afraid of it. If you've ever written the check you couldn't afford just to buy peace you never received, this story is for you. If you've ever been told that loving someone means never saying no to them, this story is for you. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment, hit subscribe. Next week, I'm telling you about the phone call that came 14 months later. The one where Paulette said something I genuinely never expected. The one that changed the way I understand forgiveness. It's worth waiting for. See you then.